very weird. Don't the blue lines look like they're at angles?
Yeah.
Everything's perfectly straight.
So
There's
what does that
that tells
tell
us,
you
well,
about me?
hey, this is something I find these things because I want people to understand that the brain is not necessarily a reliable indicator of the truth.
Oh yeah, I read that article. Linda sent it to me from your doctor.
Oh yeah, from Dr. Nally. Yeah, Tom and Anja are joining us now. They read it as well. And right now on the Circle of Brilliance calls on Tuesday, well, tomorrow we'll finish the topic where we're talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect and how it plays itself out, particularly with narcissists. So trying to see how they're related and how they feed on one another, et cetera. But then, for Oracle, the self, I always want people to kind of examine what they think to be true. And so I try to find illustrations like this just to kind of, make a little point that what their brain is telling them and what is actually the case are not always the same thing.
So do some people actually see straight lines?
No, I haven't
Okay.
found anyone yet who sees straight lines.
Isn't it like this years ago? Did you see a blue dress or a red
Yeah, in fact,
dress or
Tom and
something?
Anja joined us, or we joined them technically for dinner for Tom's birthday. And we pulled out that thing, and the three of them, Linda included, saw gold and white. And try as hard as I can only see blue and black. So,
Yep, that's what I see.
yeah, I don't know why I don't have the ability because we asked the waiter, and the waiter said he can see them both if if he kind of gets his head wrapped around it.
Yeah,
Oh,
he
cool.
was just being political for a better tip.
Yeah, you think so? In which case he's highly skilled, and so he should be rewarded.
Yes, he is.
But it's not the same as the lines, is it? Isn't it more like some sort of, like, if you look at an illusion
Yeah.
picture, some people see it, two people at a dressing table and other people see
Right,
it.
right. And that's why, the whole point of optical illusions, if you want to use them for something like the oracle, the self, is that they illustrate the unreliability of our senses to tell us exactly what's true. So, because
Well,
like you
it's
said,
not necessarily, that's interesting. I would think it's more like perception. What do you see?
it
versus
is.
you see
That's what
second,
the-
but the dress is different because the thing with the lines, I don't know if you're talking about the same thing. I kind of eavesdropped on the end of your conversation, but the scientific study that I read about had one card that had a short line and a longer line on it,
Mhm.
and then labeled them A and B.
Yep.
And then they had two separate cards, one that was the short one and one that was the long one, and they labeled them C and D. And then they had 8 people come in the room and they said, okay, pick up C or D
Yep.
and show me which line is exactly the same as B. And they
Yeah.
all picked up C where it was clearly wrong. D was correct. So 7 of them pick up C. The 7 people were all put up. They knew that was wrong. They picked up the wrong one on purpose. And the 8th participant was looking at them and thought, well, what the hell
Right.
is wrong? But a surprising number of people picked up the wrong one because they have this confirmation.
Yeah, right.
I want to conform.
Well,
by-
and I think what you're talking about now is more about biases that
Right, they
people will
purposely
cultivate.
changed because they want to be part of the group, but they knew they were wrong. Or in the
Right, exactly.
some of them got-
Exactly.
Some of them got so convinced that their brains changed their vision because
Exactly.
they wanted to conform so hard, so badly. that
Right.
their
But what
brains
what that
changed.
actually illustrates is that the brain is not reliable. So the brain can be trained to see things that are not there, or they can be
What
trained
you're
to,
saying.
you know what I'm saying? So it's like this is when people say, I'll believe it when I see it. And it's kind of like, well, we can show you all kinds of things that you're going to think are true. But just because you're going to believe it when you see it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And I think that's the point of these kinds of optical illusions that are just really saying, with no conditioning, no setup, no nothing, you throw something up on the screen and people look at this and they're almost 100% going to say the blues horizontal lines are not parallel. They're at angles. And the truth is they're all absolutely straight.
I can't see it. I can't see the straight lines. I mean, the parallel lines.
You
These
can't.
are parallel.
Oh, yeah.
See, the white ones are parallel.
Mhm.
Well, I
Yeah.
said the one way that you can actually see it is, just 1 second.
Oh, I didn't realize this was up there.
I just want to do one thing if I can find where it
These
is.
lines are straight.
Tools.
Yeah.
I want to rotate it. Now, look, even this one, it even looks worse. But if you start to lay the diagram down flat, well, there's no way for us to do this on the screen right now. But if you were to actually, oops, sorry, if you were to actually kind of like lower it in a plane, so you're kind of looking at the surface of it, these are all absolutely straight. So Brian, you want to comment on that? Why is our perceptions all screwed up, man?
Yeah. Well, I think you made a valid point that, it shows the unreliability of the brain, because you got to remember the first order of business for the brain is to preserve and conserve energy. So it's always looking for a path of least resistance. And when those things that we're quite familiar with and understand on the surface, that's what we're going to rely on first, even though there might be proof showing otherwise. And so perception and perspective are both perceiving powers, and they both use attentional faculties of the brain, but they're based on past experience first. And we go through this every day. Like, we could see something from afar and think, just because, it might have this illusion of moving, that it's a snake, but then when you get up upon it, it's a rope being moved by wind. So that kind of thing, we'll make snap judgments and decisions based on perception, but it's often based on what's called a strong synaptic connection, or a strong past behavior, or a strong past experience. So those things shape our perceptions.
Yeah. And so the point of all this, we're trying to apply this to the Oracle stuff. And I should have started the recording. So hi, everybody, it's T Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Oracle, the self-group coaching. Today is session 29. And we started by looking a little bit at optical illusions, and have some conversations about how people's brains can be conditioned to believe something that isn't really true, even in spite of evidence being presented to support a particular theory. They will still go against it because of confirmation bias. And what's the form of bias where you need to join the crowd?
Confirmation.
Consensus bias?
There's a tribunal era. There's a lot of different biases.
Yeah, there's like, we talked about biases. I think we talked about 36 different biases. And honestly, I forget the names of most of them and why one is slightly different than the others. But the point is that biases are something that are trained into people. And so, like, if Anja had said in her little setup that each one of these people went into the room all alone and did their thing, well, then the guy who ended up getting things wrong at the end or whatever, he had no opportunity to see other people, or he had no opportunity to be conditioned by other people to see what it is that they were insisting they saw. But because he was able to see how these people were interacting, that's where the bias starts coming into play. It might also be, rather than being a bias, it could also be a logical fallacy. Do you guys remember we were talking about logical fallacies as well? So A does not always equal whatever A. A does not necessarily equal A. Anyway, just to put this to rest, did you guys see that I used the annotation tool on the screen to draw a horizontal line? Yeah, that's a perfectly horizontal line. I'll be happy to draw another one for you if you'd like. So right here, I can just position my pointer, and I think it's still doing it. Oh, wait, sorry. You got to hold down shift if you want things to stay. So you see it's floating above that line in a uniform kind of location. And if I come here, no, I positioned that one better. These are absolutely straight. So
when you were going through I can't get the word, the legend up at the top, there was, and you were flashing back to this, there was a couple I saw that were straight.
Yeah, well, and that's it. So they said it depends on the angle you see it from. But the way
I laid my computer laptop down to look at it flat, and it didn't change.
Didn't help. It helps if you can look at it flat, but look at it from the blue ends of things. And you'll be able to see that these lines
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
kind of rotated around a little bit. But anyway, the point here is that, when it comes to the oracle of the self, the whole point of the oracle of the self is for people to become very much aware that a great deal of the information that is coming to them is coming to them through filters that could be distorting the truth, if not outright lying to them. And so you can't necessarily count on anything that you're being told or anything you happen to see. You have to kind of do multiple examinations of things, or the whole point of these illustrations, come at them from a different angle. And you might see that they're horizontal lines, or come at it from a different angle, and you might see the young girl rather than the old lady in, a classic kind of an optical illusion. Or maybe you're doing sometimes when you have to like find the hidden things, and they'll show you a picture of like a tree and say how many animals are in this tree, and then you start looking at patterns in the bark and all that. You go like, oh no, there's a squirrel and there's a whatever and there's a whatever. So it really is about we really are more about our perception of things than we are about the reality of things.
Yeah,
Ryan, go ahead.
I agree. I think Anais Nin, the
Yep.
poet says,
Yep.
we tend not to see things as they are, we see things as we are. And I think this is the key why awareness is so important in terms of literally, I call it scaffolding it into your experience. That's something that I try to do, from each call. It's interesting because I just had this conversation with my nephew, and we were talking about learning and how I was taught to learn from everything in life. In fact, the elders used to say to never let schooling interfere with your education. So it matter not like how many degrees you have, like you can learn from everything in life. And if you're not learning, then you're growing. And if you look at today's time in terms of this oracle itself, we assume a lot of content, a lot of information, and one might call that learning. But then you're not actually applying it or embodying what it is that you actually call learn.
Yeah, and some say that learning really doesn't occur until behavior changes.
And that's the whole point I'm trying to make there. So this is what the oracle itself for me is about. It's this idea of behavior change. Even since the last call that we had, I've been looking at this idea about why I don't have patience when it comes to healthcare systems. And I have patience when it comes to dealing with anyone else, like the foster care kids, or even patients themselves. But when it comes to healthcare systems, and when they say things like patient-centered, and I'm in these meetings that say patient-centered value-based care, I'll just outright come and tell them, you know what, that's dumb. And it's because I'm like, what
They're so
patients have
glad they
you talked
invited
to?
you to their meeting.
Exactly. That's what people keep saying. Like, you might get deported because you're just too harsh. But it comes from this bias of seeing, growing up in a world of family, seeing healthcare disparities and these things as a young lad. And so, I treat it very serious, but I don't have enough discipline, is what I come to understand.
Yeah.
Around that, as I do like with other aspects of my life. There's just not enough discipline to see and hear other perspectives. And so immediately I'll react.
Right. And that's where we're really getting to in the oracle itself. It's like, where on the change grid are you? And when you are there on the change grid, how does this affect your perceptions, and as a result, your biases, your logical fallacies? Or is it simply an illusion that you're accepting as the truth? Where is it all coming from? Where on the change grid are you going to have the ability to have the clearest, most accurate data available to you? And that's our whole point, is to explore that. And once we've decided where that is, and most of us already know where that is, then the question is really going to be, how do I get myself there, and how do I keep myself there? So that's what this is really, really kind of getting to. One other thing I'll share with you before we pick up where we left off last time around is that You guys are always invited to go to the Circle of Brilliance conversations as well. At this stage, you know plenty to be able to join in on those conversations. And you'll hear a lot of the same people that have joined us for the Monday calls are also on the Tuesdays and Thursday calls. Tomorrow, we're going to be finishing up our subject on the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so, you know, you guys can listen to last week's episode to kind of bring yourselves up to speed. But bottom line, what's this Dunning-Kruger effect all about, and how does it resonate with or work against a narcissistic personality disorder? So we're going to see if we can figure out where does all that land on the change grid, and what does that help us to better understand, and what does it hopefully explain for us. So that we're going to finish that up tomorrow. Now, on Thursday, I'm going to start a new topic with the circle, and that is about empaths. And I'm going to ask everyone to just kind of give some thought to the question, are you an empath? And I ended up doing a lot of digging through our archives. Apparently, some 20 years ago, I wrote a series of 3 articles on the subject of empaths. And it might not be quite 20 years ago, because what triggered it was an episode of Star Trek. And I do talk about that episode in the articles as well. But I started going through them and went like, you know, this is a very important thing for people to understand in general. To what degree are each of you an empath? And are you good at it, or are you bad at it? Because empaths can have a whole litany of beautiful traits, characteristics, qualities, values, and value to other people. But if they're not really careful, if they're not aware of what's going on, they can become very susceptible to emotional overload, and that overload makes them more susceptible to manipulations, and getting sucked into a whole set of beliefs and behaviors that ultimately result in a really bad situation. So, so anyway, I put that together years ago, and in recent conversations I've had with a couple of you, I thought, this seems to be coming up again. So let's dig it out and dust it off and see if I can bring it updated if I need to, but present to you guys. Well, what I found was some 28 pages long. So apparently, at some point, we did a very deep dive into the world of being an empath. And are you an attached? Now, we talked about this on the circle not all that many months ago, about being attached to something versus detached. And certainly on this call, we've talked about the importance of detaching yourself. One of the most important skills in the Oracle skill set is being able to separate yourself from whatever's going on around you, so that you are more of an observer of it rather than being in it. So rather than experiencing it, or even experiencing it vicariously because it's somebody else's situation and you're hearing more about it, learning more about it, you're getting more and more attached to it. So, where's that all, how's that all coming from? And how do we go about then systematically detaching ourselves from that? And hopefully, as you learn to detach yourself and practice that more and more, it becomes more and more of a natural, and at some point in time, hopefully an automatic kind of a response whenever you are I'm going to say exposed to some situation out there. So are you a attached empath? Are you a detached empath? And again, how much of an empath are you? So there's a whole range there. But then we also talked about in those articles, are you a rigid empath, a metamorphic empath, or a flexible empath? So it's a really interesting kind of thing to take a look at, and hopefully you guys will find that interesting at the very least, and useful with any luck at all. So we'll be sending out a promo email about that later on today. It's the same link. Whenever we announce something, we're just announcing it because we send out our announcements to a very large audience, and I'd like to see the circle expand a little bit. I don't want it to, become massive, but it might be nice to have a couple of additional people join in. So hopefully that stimulates some people to join in. Okay, thoughts about empath? metamorphic empath, detached, authentic empath. What do you want? Anything? Any questions there? Comments before we move on?
That sounds fun.
It can be fun.
Doesn't that have a lot to do with emotional intelligence and
It has a lot to do, thank you, with emotional intelligence. In fact, that might be when we were talking about it, because I know we were looking at a change grid. Let me open up a diagram here since the subject has now occurred. I need a change grid. Just a second. There we are. Yes, open up. Very nice. Slide over here. When we were going through our exploration of emotional intelligence, who's the gentleman who is kind of like the father of emotional intelligence? And we remember his name?
Goldman, Daniel Goldman.
Goldman, right. Goldman, not gold, but Goleman. Goldman, provides very detailed descriptions about what emotional intelligence is and how it presents itself, how it's useful, blah, 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 blah. And we were pretty much able to identify emotional intelligence as residing from the PowerPoint up-grid and out-grid, incorporating these 4 subquadrants. So a driven expressive, an analytical expressive, an amiable driver, and an expressive driver. These are the people who tend to be exhibiting more of the emotional intelligence. So this is more about emotional intelligence in play. I mean, because you know what, if it's just, it can't really describe you as a person. It really is, how are you as that person operating in a given set of circumstances? And that's where your emotional intelligence will either come through or your lack thereof will reveal itself. And so emotional intelligence is brought into play whenever there is conflict. The moment we use the word conflict, we know that something, what direction, up-grid or down-grid, is happening. There's a conflict. Up-grid. And when we're talking about conflict, are we talking about an in-grid or an out-grid energy? What do you think? It's up, for sure.
It's out.
Up-grid. It's up and out because there's a conflict. That means there's differing viewpoints, and people seem to be willing to fight about it one way or another. Whether it's a loving debate or whether it becomes a fist fight, we'll wait and see. I imagine the fist fight part takes us too far out-grid, and now we're no longer in the domain of where the intelligence lies. But emotional intelligence was all about how do we handle challenging situations. This is where resilience tends to live, that kind of cooperative sort of problem solving, all the good attributes. So it originates at the origin. It's actually, you are most emotionally intelligent. How do I put this? No, I would say you are waiting. Your emotional intelligence is not really being put to the test when you're in the middle, but we know the moment the test appears, you're able to respond to it. So anywhere from the center to these 4 subquadrants is what we decided was the kind of home base for emotional intelligence. Thoughts about that? Questions, comments?
I have a question. What are the 2 quadrants that are in the green circle there?
Well, this one right here, to the outgrid side of things, this little, I don't know, pie-shaped wedge, if you will, is almost entirely the amiable driver energy, right?
Okay.
So the amiable driver lives right here. And so we're saying that inside of the green circle, one of the most, valuable things you may decide to do from your centered place is to step out-grid a little bit. The moment you step out-grid, what are you trying to do? What does this little bit of out-grid energy want to do?
You're expressing something, or you?
Expresses up here. So
you're driving that energy forward. Now you're trying to apply it.
Right, and so we've got
to
fix something, and usually it's something involving people or things that would support people because it's being driven by that amiable secondary energy. So remember, the driver energy wants to accomplish something. The amiable energy wants to care about something. So if you're an amiable driver, you are driven to accomplish something in the domain of caring. That's the energy, as long as you're in the green circle. So, and you might decide to do that. You know what? I am going to step off my lovely little island and get in a little bit into the mix of things to move something forward. And then, Brian, the other possibility would be this little upgrade wedge, which would be the analytical expressive.
Makes
So,
sense.
right. And so we're basically saying from this point, you know what? I can see what's really going on. That's my analytical secondary energy. But it's really causing a whole lot of feelings and responses and reactions right now. Let me see if I can get up there a little bit to calm down this craziness, and bring people there. So use those feelings in a more constructive, deliberate, calculated kind of way. Present the right feeling in the right dose at the right time. And you may very well be able to calm people down to, be centered again. So I can do the same thing further too, but you guys get where we're
Yeah.
going. This is where emotional intelligence lived. And so the question really becomes, let's say that you are an empath, and without giving anything big away, generally speaking, people who are drawn to helping professions tend to
Mhm.
score very high on empathy,
Mhm.
right? And so a great deal of the time when I'm hearing you guys talk, I hear an upgrid energy and or an outgrid energy about situations that you personally are not experiencing, but you are aware of, you're witnessing, you've been exposed to it, and you've now attached yourself to whatever that dynamic happens to be or that situation happens to be. The moment you attach yourself, all of those dark side qualities of being an empath start to come into play, or may start coming into play. Things like you caring about that situation more than the people who are actually involved care about that situation. Or you becoming another player in that psychodrama, as opposed to being an audience member observing the psychodrama.
Wow.
You with me on
Okay.
this? Is this too much? I mean, if it's too much, I'll
Well, no,
take
you
it off
just
the list.
it just called out everything for me right there. The cornerstone of emotional intelligence that Daniel often talk about was this idea of self-awareness. And
Yeah.
what you just described is I'm very much attached uh, to these things that I see need to, not what I want to, they need to change in healthcare to get people healthier. And so I respond out of the dark side as opposed to, and I'm quite disciplined. I live a very disciplined life on purpose. But when it comes to that, I don't hold back. And like I said before, my mom shares stories with me that I've always been a person that didn't mind expressing my opinion, like since first grade. So I have a long history with it.
Right. And
And
now the difference is that as you are expressing those feelings, and again, this program is the oracle of the self, so we always have to get back to this little reminder that the most important thing we're looking at is the conversations that you are having with you about you. And so lock
Mhm.
into that, because all these little dynamics we're describing and how they play out in relationships and interactions and business settings and, whatever label you want to give to what Brian's out there doing in Argentina or wherever they've put him right now, these are all external situations. And it's great that we can see how these principles apply there. But this is the oracle of the self. So we really have to focus on how do these principles apply to the conversations that we are having with ourselves about ourselves. And so
Yeah.
let me throw a little glimpse into that. There's a big difference between being able to feel what other people are feeling, to be able to pick up in an environment, in your own environment for that matter, energies that are giving you information. So the question becomes, is that authentically you? Or have you basically morphed into what you would need to be a member of the situation outside of you? You know what I mean? Again, you've gotten out of the
Mhm.
audience and you've stepped up on stage. So if you now, as you morph around that, that can also be a very useful skill, because particularly when it comes to the helping professions, we have to meet people where they are. And so instead of me trying to change them to morph into me, I need to have enough understanding of what I'm doing to morph into where they are. Oh, that's a
Mhm.
useful kind of skill. The question now becomes, if I morph into what they need and I do that often enough, long enough, and deeply enough, at what point does it now become me?
Exactly.
I
That's where I
think
see the trouble is, right?
Right.
that's
Because you
not
have
your
to be
authentic
grounded.
you, that's the problem.
That's right.
Exactly.
And so this is
Exactly.
where this whole idea about being a metamorph came from. Somehow or another, I'm basically spending this time. We're halfway through the call and I'm talking about stuff I'm talking about on Thursday. Ah, someone make me shut up.
Keep going. No, it's really
All right,
fascinating, and I'm
fine.
grabbing it, sort of.
Yeah, look, I'm all fine with it. Sooner
But
or later,
it is it's the oracle of self nonetheless, because
all
what you
right,
just
good.
described, why, at least from my perspective, since the last call, what I was looking at is this groundedness. Am I grounded, like in the am I in the center before I went into the situation? And part of what I do in general, keeping myself, requires that discipline. And
Yeah.
I have it in other areas, but what I noted is, thankfully I keep journals, is I don't do the same kind of grounding, if you will, before I
Right.
go into these meetings. So I ask people about their perceptions of me since the last call, and I heard words like, uh, I'm intense.
Mhm.
So when I tell someone, like, that's woefully, how did I say? I said to someone, that's woefully short-sighted and rather disingenuous to think that their idea will work, and they haven't talked to any patient. So they was like, yeah, you can be intense. I heard intense like from 4 different people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And they're not lying to you, man. So,
But
own
what's
your
wrong
personal
with
truth.
that?
Well, look, again, there's
But what's
nothing,
wrong with that?
there's
Well,
nothing.
it's not that it's wrong per se, but that doesn't get the job done in terms
There
of
you go.
getting them to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture, my research is all on like this neurobiology of getting people to take control over their own health. So part of my chapters that I'm writing in a co-author research book is titled Beyond Diagnoses. I'm trying to get physicians and other clinicians to see the humanity beyond the physical, and I'm trying to get them there. And so it's so important for me to get them there that I become detached to how we can go about it. It's like saying you win a war by saying I'm right, you're wrong. That doesn't get the job done.
No, no. And so,
But
Anja,
it's your personality, Brian. I mean, it's not your personality. It's your intensity is your care, your dedication, your opinion that you've had since you were 1 year old.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, but it gets me in a heap of trouble.
That's right. So Anja, yeah, there's two very different things in play right now. It is true that all those attributes describe Brian, and in under a given set of circumstances, those qualities could serve him very, very well. But as he's acknowledged, if you are trying to achieve a particular outcome, you may need to come at it from a different approach. And that's where emotional intelligence comes into play. It's about having the behavioral flexibility to, do whatever it is and carry yourself and present yourself in the way that best serves your desired outcome.
Okay, just one comment.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
like that.
If he does that,
Yeah,
doesn't that, I mean, he is intensely opinionated, but well-informed and right. Okay, let's give him all those for sure. Isn't he inauthentic? How does he stop from
no,
being
well, here's
inauthentic?
the difference. Here's the difference. And again, we'll get into this in grand detail. Again, it's 28 pages of stuff. So it's about, is he doing it deliberately or accidentally?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And
if he
see,
is
my
conscious,
way would not be to do it that way because I'm quite uh introvert. I don't have a problem expressing myself extrovertly, like in terms of speaking, but all of that and my response to that, it takes a lot of energy because then I'm always thinking about, oh shit, do I need to apologize? Did I come at this the right? I reflect on that stuff. Like I do that after each of these calls. And so it's not my natural way of going about it, but I don't mind doing it
Yeah.
to play that role.
Let's see if I can draw this out so you guys can kind of understand some of the things we're talking about. And again, this is Thursday's subject, but here goes. If you join us on Thursday, you're going to hear bits and pieces of this. Hopefully on Thursday, we'll start at the beginning though.
Hey,
So,
can I say something?
sure.
It kind of reminds me when I'm so passionate about healthcare that I can, without even knowing it, be so passionate, no matter whether I'm saying what's totally factual and totally what's happening, people get turned off.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if
Right.
I really want to get across my point that I'm so passionate about, I need to learn how to calm down.
Well, and this is the challenge of anyone who has to communicate, particularly to educate, influence, or somehow persuade someone to do something. We have to have the behavioral flexibility to meet people where they are and present things in a language and in a context that they can most readily understand, embrace, and act upon. That burden's on us. Because if we just go to all situations as our authentic self, the likelihood of us matching everybody who's in the room is pretty slim, because how often do you guys think you actually meet a completely authentic person?
Mm.
You know, they might not even have the awareness of whether they are authentic or inauthentic. And so let me just give you this little diagram, and I don't have it that I could just throw it up on screen right now, but you just have to look at the change grid and you'll see what's going on. If I'm at the center of the change grid, I am an authentic, detached empath. What that means is that I have the ability to see, feel, understand everything that's going on around me, yet I am completely detached from it. So I'm authentic, I'm detached, and I'm feeling whatever it is that's going on. Now, the way that this whole idea about empath overlays on the change grid is as a radial trend. And so as I step away from the center, my flexibility, if you will, that authentic kind of flexibility, is going to move into a metamorphic stage. At a certain point, that metamorphic stage is going to result in rigidity unless I'm really aware and really careful. So now, along the way, there are countless points on that continuum. And so there's going to be coming a point in time where I'm going to move from being my authentic self to being a little bit more in the morphic stage. I'll talk about metamorphic in just a second, but morphic, more flexibility in my my approach for understanding others, presenting things, etc. And as I do that more and more, there is a possibility that I could come to believe that I have discovered the perfect way in which moment I'll become rigid about it. So that's going to hold true in all directions around it. So it'll make much greater sense. But I want you guys to just think about that. What kind of a empath you're going to be depends on where you are on the change grid, like anything else. And so if you want to be the most effective empath that you can be, it's in the center of the change grid. But work is not done in the center. You can be the authentic, flexible, detached empath, all these wonderful, wonderful words, but nothing much happens at the center of the change grid. And you have to get out there and decide to do something. So I'm going to make something happen, or more gently, because it's amiable, I'm going to encourage things to happen. I'm going to support things in happening. I'm going to get out there and see how I can move things forward. It's going to get more aggressive later. Or maybe it's an upgrade situation and I need to think about rescuing people who are in some kind of distress, or helping in-grid people to find their courage and find their esteem and their sense of self. And maybe it's downgrade people that I need to help awaken and rediscover what they're all about and what they could be doing. I have to step off center for any work to actually happen. And the moment I do that, I have to recognize that in this world, if I'm going to carry myself and present myself at all times, under all circumstances, as my authentic self, I am probably going to turn off more people than I'm going to turn on. And so I have to be willing to blend. I have to be willing to modify things. I have to be willing to change, to morph, if you will. Now, we have to talk about this metamorphic kind of thing for just a second, because when I say morph, I'm saying changing, but a morph is still in motion. A morph is still, I want to say, wet clay. So I can change to meet somebody where they are and immediately move back to my authentic self. Or I can meet them where they are and draw them with me towards the center. I can change, but the change that I'm making is temporary, conscious, deliberate, calculated, whatever word you want to put in there. But ultimately, I know I have the power, I have the ability to go back to my authentic self whenever I want. So for the most part now, I've been talking about inside the green circle and slightly outside of the green circle out here between the green and the red. What happens between the green and the red circles?
Life is lived.
That's where life is lived. So I'm out there, you know, being whatever I can be. So you have to understand what metamorphs are. So I'm going to tell you where it came from, tell you a little backstory, and then I want you to see if you can see how this applies to people's behavior, perhaps even your own. And again, I always have to remind people, the change grid is situationally specific. Just because you might be overly attached in situation A does not mean you're always going to be overly attached in every situation. It really does depend. So nevertheless, here we go. So this particular episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, I forget what it was called, but it was like the perfect something or another. And it tells the story of the Enterprise being asked to transport some precious cargo to a location where there's going to be a meeting that should heal the battle that's been happening between two planets forever and then some. The leader of one planet has decided to offer a precious gift to another, to the leader of the other planet to get things all healed, etc. And this particular thing, the people who have brought it on board have said, no one can see it, no one can touch it. You don't need to know what's inside of it. You've only been asked to transport. And so obviously it causes some conflict among the people on the crew. Well, Wesley Crusher, who at the time was a very young man, a teenager, if I'm not mistaken, decides to violate rules, goes into the, what do they call where they store their cargo hold or whatever. And somehow or another, he inadvertently bumps into this thing, knocks it off of its little suspended track, and it falls to the ground. Now, you know, a couple of feet to the ground or whatever, because it had been floating up to this point in time. Zero gravity. And it breaks open. And what Wesley discovers is that inside of it is a woman. So now he lets everyone know, and everyone gets their own a bunch, because what do you mean you're giving a leader of another planet a woman? So obviously it brings up all kinds of issues that need to be discussed. Well, this woman now is out of her suspended animation. She's there. Obviously, she's a VIP guest. She has the ability to walk around the Enterprise, etc. Well, here's the interesting thing. As she starts to walk around the Enterprise, every single person she meets instantly feels as though she is their perfect match, their soulmate, their perfect, spouse, their perfect partner, whatever it is. And she's not really doing anything. She's just kind of, being pleasant and being, smiling and whatever the case may be. Well, comes to find out, she is a metamorphic empath. A metamorphic empath has the ability, and this is where I want you to see if you can make this extension to Oracle of the Self territory, but a metamorphic empath has the ability to instantly understand and be recognized as understanding what someone else is going through, what someone else needs. So
Mhm.
instantly being able to understand it and instantly being viewed as someone who does understand it. And so all these people are falling in love with her and blah, 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 blah. And she's just being the metamorphic empath that she happens to be. Now,
Mhm.
comes to find out, or at a certain point in time, you can tell that her and Picard are falling for each other in a really big way. And she reveals to Picard that it is true that she is a metamorphic empath, but at a certain point in time, a metamorphic empath will choose a single individual and will permanently adapt to that individual and be connected, cathected, the perfect mate forever with that person. And then all their other metamorphic qualities fall by the wayside. They can no longer just morph and be whatever for everybody. Now they can only be for this one person, whatever this one person actually needs.
What a
Well,
sad entity.
well, this
And if you're happy, no war.
well, this is a very, very interesting episode because it does bring up conversation on a whole lot of levels. One of those levels is, well, what about her? Well, this is what comes up, and she says, "I don't want to be bound to one guy. I don't want to be. I forget what the word is, imprinted or whatever. They've got some verb for what actually happens." With him, and but she has to fulfill her duty. She is here to heal the planets, and on and she's very, very rare. Only 1 in 100,000 empaths will be metamorphic and blah blah blah. Well, so unbeknownst to Picard, she decides that instead of losing herself altogether at the metamorphic extreme or the conclusion of the metamorphic experience, she's going to bond herself forever to Picard. And so she is basically Picard's perfect kind of mate. And she lets him know that. And then she goes and fulfills her whole kind of duty. All right. So that's basically the episode. Obviously, it's an interesting episode at a lot of different levels. But the question I have for you guys is, can you see how some people, because they're so empathetic, because they not only can immediately understand what everyone is going through and become what that situation needs most, that at a certain point in time, if they're not careful, they're going to bond or anchor or imprint on that situation, which, by the way, is not the genuine, authentic them. And so that's when now it becomes rigid. And so I think the lesson here is that being able to morph is a wonderful skill that anyone in the helping profession or anyone who just wants to get along better with other people, it's great to have this ability. The problem becomes when you get so connected to whatever's going on. So attached is our word. So attached to what that other person's situation is that you become it and it becomes you. And now the authentic you is lost.
Well, it sounds like somebody who has absolutely no self-esteem whatsoever. I mean,
Well,
it sounds
you are correct. You are correct. But the more common problem is that these people are unaware that it's even happening. So a metamorphic empath may not even have ever thought about them being an empath, because for them, it's just the way they've always been. It's just another day of life for them, that they do pick up on what other people are thinking and feeling, and they know what people are going to say and do, and they kind of know how all the players of the drama are interacting and interplaying with one another. They may never have labeled it. And as a result, they may never have learned that the greatest danger to an empath is if they do not recognize the early warning signs of them becoming too attached, too involved, too connected, too whatever. That's where the life of an empath becomes misery.
Mhm.
So yeah. So Anja, thoughts about that?
It's very sad.
It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. Because now here's the other thing to kind of know. And without giving any details away, one of the stories that we have been exploring on this has to do with someone who, for whatever reasons, is prone to high levels of self-sacrifice in order to keep their family happy, in order to minimize conflict, arguments, etc. And there's been a very long habit, a long pattern of someone doing this. Well, the truth be told is the individual who is central to that whole drama is an empath. But unfortunately, at some point in time, they lost control of their own empathic capabilities. They entered this metamorphic kind of stage and morphed so much that they, and then, you know, bonded or anchored to that situation. So now they define themselves as that situation or as part of that situation. They can't leave it, they're it. Or they, you know, they've created it, they're sustaining it, etc. Now, the problem is that when you have an empath who has already lost their authenticity, they now start to seek out, perhaps intentionally, perhaps just inadvertently, but they find or stumble across other empaths. And those empaths now need to be able to see the situation for what it is so that they can decide, do I want to morph a little bit so that I can better understand and be seen as someone who does understand and support and whatever I can do in that. So, you know, they're very conscious of it, because if they're not, they too can get sucked all the way into the drama. And now they end up having this metamorphic event happen where now they're an integrated part of whatever that situation happens to be.
Nice.
Hey,
Yes.
okay, so if you're in your circle and you go out of your circle and you hang up the phone and you go back into your circle, that is the object?
That's good. That's absolutely good. Sure, you just live your day inside of your green circle and up the phone rings or somebody knocks on the door and you go out there and live life. You said like, all right, I'm emotionally intelligent. I can flex a little bit to be more understanding, compassionate, appear that I care, even though I may not, or whatever. I can go there and do that. And then once I hang up, if I'm good at what I'm doing, I'm going to do some sort of PowerPoint maneuver, something to move me in grid.
Mhm.
So do I need to clean my energy? To get it away from me? I got to get it off of me. Right. So it's like, think about what you've done when you've gone out here between the green and the red circle, is that you've caught somebody else's cooties. How are you going to get these cooties off of you so that you can get back to just being the authentic you? It's this,
Yeah.
this is the challenge in the world of being an empath. And by the way, it's the whole point of the series of calls and the series of articles that I wrote. It's not about whether you're an most people have some good, solid empathetic skills, so that are empathic skills. Some far more gifted than others. But all of these individuals, or all of us, if you will, if we are not aware and we are not well practiced, we could easily find ourselves morphing into some situation and then ultimately getting trapped there. So there is no way back.
Yeah, I think we're all born with some sense of it because it's quite natural in terms of humans and their neurochemistry, if you will, in
Yep.
terms of socializing and belonging.
Well, and the whole oxytocin thing draws
Exactly.
me to become more attached.
Exactly. But to your point, though, I just wrote a page worth in my journal because that behavioral flexibility, I think, is important. And I learned this quite early in traveling. I think the first country we lived in outside of South Africa was Kenya. I remember the Swahili word Mazungu means outsider. So I was treated as an outsider. And so I had to do the whole Stephen Covey, you know, in terms of adapting, seek first to understand, then be understood.
Yep.
And I learned how to do that. I think it's interesting to hear this because it seems like almost in one sense, like I'm at a point where I'm tired of, I won't say playing the game. Like in some scenarios, it's like I don't I don't do that. Like the reflection, that getting centered and that thing. And when it comes to like this stuff I'm doing in healthcare, but again, you know, after my wife and daughter's accident, when I started taking in foster care kids, intuitively, I just knew to do that.
Yeah.
So that whatever behavior they express, I was not blaming them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Same thing when it comes to patients. I make sure my languaging, everything is right such that it's not blaming them. So I always seen myself in this, from this triune perspective that I always called it. Like there's the me that met the moment. There's the me that's in the process of embodying something that I'm bringing forward to that situation. And then there's the me actualized on the other side of that, and then
Right,
go back in
right.
to reflect.
Yep, yep, yep,
And
yep.
what bothers me, I think, is again, from as a disciplined person, I know how to do that in many areas of life. But when it comes to this stuff as of late, in terms of
Yeah,
what I see the trajectory of my career, I don't practice it. So that's quite fascinating for me to experiment
right.
with.
Because you got to get back. And by the way, lots of things will move you back to the center. You can take a few deep breaths and get there. You could meditate. You could walk among nature. There's all kinds of things that'll get you back to being the authentic you. But if people don't understand the risk that they are at as an empath, that you are at when you go out there and start interacting with other people. And by the way, it's not just interacting with other people, it's also interacting with the media. Because if you're hearing messages of gloom, doom, death, and despair, and threat and chaos, and blah, 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 and somehow or another, you don't just kind of morph into it to feel it a little bit, to understand how that feels, how the people involved are feeling, and why they're feeling the way they are, that's good. Get back to the center. But if you find yourself getting so pulled in, or the people, yeah, in a second we'll talk about manipulation, but you could end up having that whole metamorphic occurrence occur, where you've gone from being able to understand anybody and everybody to now connecting, attaching yourself to just one viewpoint or one cause or one whatever. And, you know, again, it's situationally specific, so you can do it multiple times with multiple things, but you're stuck. How are we going to get you out of that permanent bond that you've established with whatever that external situation happens to be, and help you find your authentic self again? I mean, again, there's a presupposition there that your authentic self is not this hyper cathected, individual or attached empath. I do want to talk a little bit about manipulation in just a second. It's more about the susceptibility to manipulation, but I do feel like I need to throw out there that I did put this material together long ago. There is a reason I never did anything with it. And that reason is that, remember, I focused on corporate clients. Corporate clients had no interest in this subject matter whatsoever. Right. And so unless I was going to change gear altogether and start to work not only with individuals out there on planet Earth, but individuals that were two things. You needed to be bright enough to absorb the content, but you also had to be, evolved enough to see that the content had value to you. And now I seem to be stepping in that direction, but we have dozens, if not hundreds of hours of material that we never fleshed out for corporate consumption, but it may very well fit in for you guys. Okay.
Do you think they're ready now? Like under maybe the auspices
Oh,
of
no.
leadership development or something like that?
Business in the United States has to hit rock bottom. Like anybody else who is in an addictive situation, they aren't going to change their behaviors until the behaviors they're currently exhibiting not only no longer serve them, but become deeply problematic. We're a long
Aren't they there
way.
now? Are
No,
they not?
we can find bits, little
In terms
examples
of
here
like
and
these
there.
stats on burnout,
I don't know.
depression, stress, those
Yeah,
things,
but
aren't they there?
they're starting to be there. But again, change only occurs when someone says enough.
Mm.
So people can tolerate tremendously high levels of inconvenience, discomfort, disruption, and continue on the surface with life as usual. So remember, we say that that threshold of activation is the level of tension that someone takes immediate definitive action. It's the level of tension where real change occurs. If you are not changing, and things are not changing in any grand kind of way quite yet, the truth be told, that individual does not find their current situation troublesome enough to bother doing anything definitive to change it. That's an exact quote. They can find it troublesome enough to moan and groan about it. They can find it troublesome enough to kind of throw a little bit of superficial energy at it. But the real work of change, that definitive change, bottom line, is that it isn't out of control enough quite yet.
And T, I would say that it's systematic.
Oh, yeah.
I think the capitalist system, I don't think it parallels with empathy.
Well, I don't know that it does. You're right. So maybe this is what it is, that something is, I mean, going back to my Star Trek example, if you guys are Star Trek fans, you know that the concept of money does not exist. So the concept of need, of want, or whatever, none of that even exists. So although it doesn't get talked about, at some point over the history of the development of the Federation of Planets, they had to have solved those, common plights of mankind to be able to reach that sort of thing. So at least in theory, they're supposed to be a more enlightened bunch. Go ahead.
Don't you think it has a lot to do with capitalism in whose hands? Because
Absolutely.
it's when it's put in the hands of someone who's, it in and of itself, it has to provide a product or a service, something that someone needs, is happy with, wants to buy, wants to have, wants to work for enough to have.
Happy, do and feel. Yep.
Yes.
Well, and this
But it's not
connects to-
inherently bad. It's only bad when it's in bad hands.
Well, you're absolutely right. And this is something that I think Kathy brought up on a prior call, where she named some companies that are very much teal. They're very much evolved now. Now, that's a Circle of Brilliance call we did on teal organizations. But there are organizations out there right now that really do behave. They built themselves, they've structured themselves, they conduct themselves in a very, what I want to say, caring sort of way, very aware, all that kind of stuff. And their profits are skyrocketing.
Right. I've heard the term compassionate capitalism.
Right. So,
But capitalism itself isn't necessarily compassionate or not. It's the people behind it.
no, you're absolutely right. You're
Should be
absolutely right.
compassionate in order to be successful. It should be. It should be
Of
the
course,
only way it succeeds.
right. It should be.
Right.
So the question is,
However,
why
human beings are flawed. It's hard to be good.
particularly
With children.
Yeah, particularly when the world is engineered for the bad to end
Right.
better off.
Right.
Okay, so again, this goes back to what I said to Brian. It's not bad enough yet. So right now we're starting to see some positive examples of how things could be done. This idea, I love the idea about being more about, did you say caring capitalism or?
Compassionate.
Compassionate capitalism. So it's wonderful. There are examples that are out there, but those examples do not describe the sweeping majority of companies that are out there. How compassionate can you be if you're a publicly traded company whose mandate is to generate as much of a return on your shareholders' investments as possible?
Exactly.
Right.
So there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done. Pardon me.
Done or undone, because it's when the companies get taken over by the accountants, which has been a growing,
That's the worst case scenario. You're
that's the avalanche. That's the avalanche.
That's the avalanche.
Well,
And again,
listen to this, T. And this is why I'm quite compassionate about humanity, because when we talk about health in general, it's been researched that 30% has to do with genetics, 15% social, 5% environment, 10% medical care, 30% behavioral patterns.
all right.
So that's a lot that we can do outside of healthcare systems. And that's why I coined it beyond diagnoses. I want to bring the tension management perspective to healthcare. so they can understand there's a humanity behind these diagnoses. And let's meet
Right,
that humanity.
and it may very well be that whatever ails you has really been caused by poor tension management to begin with.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
So
In
it is
fact,
a nice
that's
little circle.
more than 80% of health right there. That's health.
Right, right. Now, I know we're at the top of the hour, but I need to just give one kind of summary comment right now because of something I'm hearing, and I want to make sure that a tool is provided for this. So, Anja, as you've been describing the situation, Brian, as you've been describing the situation, and I'm sure others are feeling and thinking along the same lines, you have to ask yourself, am I detached or am I attached to that situation? Is my attachment something that is simply a conscious, deliberate morph I'm making so that I can enter that world a little bit to better understand it, to maybe someday figure out a better way to strategize to deal with? Or am I being sucked into it and now I'm becoming it? So I think it's really important for the oracle of the self and for anyone's work as an empath is that you realize that things happen in the world. And the best thing you can feel about all the things that are happening is what?
Stay cool.
Is what's that now?
Stay in your lane, stay cool, stay detached.
Stay cool, stay detached. The best thing for you to do is to look at all this craziness that's going on in the world around us at whatever level you want to look at it. And instead of connecting to it emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, or whatever, and becoming part of it, you instead say, isn't it interesting that X is happening? Isn't it fascinating that the players involved in X are doing this and this and this and this? Isn't it curious how they've decided that this seems to be serving them well? I know I'm squiggling outgrade because most times it's an outgrade thing or an upgrade thing. So, we need to be able to detach ourselves so that we can be an observer of this clinically. We know we're succeeding as being an observer when we can present the insight, the understanding, the scenario in a neutral, flat kind of way. And so if you find yourself becoming a bit animated, just kind of stop for a second, go like, why am I animated by this? How does that animation serve anyone anywhere? And that's going to get us ultimately to the subject of manipulation, because as you move away from this center, you know that you become increasingly susceptible to the messaging of others. And it is that messaging that can pull you off or pull you away from your authentic, detached, empathic self, and instead pull you into a situation where if you're not careful, you can actually become part of their little cause or whatever. That may or may not be what you really wanted to do. So that's why I say it sounds callous, but we practice the art of caring detachment. And because you hear me say that word caring, know that when I say this, I mean it in the best possible way. The best thing for us to feel when we're observing the world around us is nothing. We don't need to feel anything. As Brian has pointed out on several occasions, feelings are emotions. Emotions are designed to get us into action. We're not ready to get into action yet. We don't need any emotion to move us. In fact, if those emotions are present and begin moving us, it may be moving us too soon before the work of being an observer, a detached kind of sage, empath, whatever, is complete. So always notice your response to things before you do much else with it. So yeah. So Brian, you talk a lot about being upset by other people's behavior. No longer be upset by it. Be fascinated by it. Be curious about it.
Yeah, I just wrote
Amused by
down
it.
in my journal that I I'm trained as a scientist, right? So I know how to put myself experimentally in different scenarios to learn from it, and
Right.
that's my natural thing to do, is figuring it out. So that's
Well,
the
you
Diane
just need,
Bufflin move.
right. So you just need to apply it to this. A scientist is
Exactly.
detached. They might have a hypothesis, but as they begin their research, they would be a pretty lousy um, researcher if they began to steer things in the direction they wanted the outcome
Right.
to go. They
Right.
got to stay clean and neutral. They have to basically, we talk about caring detachment. They have to detach, which to outsiders may look like they don't care. But the fact is, they care so deeply that they're willing to turn off their own emotional responses to something so they can remain focused on finding the truth, if such a thing is even possible in a given situation.
Right. I wrote down in my journal just now the Diane Bufflin maneuver, but also the T maneuver, I called it. When you say, so tell me more about that.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
So instead of telling someone that you're woefully short-sighted, I could I probably could use,
That's true.
tell me more about
Yeah,
that.
tell me more. Tell me more. And why have you
Uh,
chosen to share this now?
right.
I mean, that's the questions we ask for good coaching or whatever. But it's about, there's a reason why we all have to learn skills when it comes to how we go about, whether it is coaching or consulting or training or doctoring or whatever. There's a reason why there's an interactive skill set that is so important. And the biggest part of that importance is that we got to keep you. Because if you get sucked in or pulled off center, and now you're out here, you're no longer in the center where you could actually have been useful.
Yeah. And it seems to me the caring detachment part, at least for me, although I have a natural capacity to do it, but at this point, when I'm too overwhelmed, that has to be intentional. And that's what I mean
Oh,
by
yeah.
the
Right.
discipline aspect that I
It's
bring
work.
to other areas. I have to be intentional about it. I can't
That's
just
right. That's
depend
right.
on, oh, well, I had success in this area, so I can have success here. It has to be intentional.
Right. And so let me throw this out as a horrible little thought, but nevertheless, most people are totally unaware of this empathic capability and the dangers that await them because of their empathic capabilities. So every day, a large group of empaths are being sucked into a situation where they are bonding forever, bonding permanently with whatever the drama happens to be. So they are no longer available to see things right. And that means this population of people who see things right, day by day by day, is getting smaller, and the population that sees things in a distorted way is getting greater.
Mhm.
So that's the real problem. So that's why it's like so vitally important that those of us who can be aware of how this bonding thing occurs, this metamorphing kind of thing occurs, can insulate ourselves, protect ourselves, and operate accordingly. Yeah.
Wow, this is too good. Too good.
Okay, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Someday I'll bequeath to all of you my, I have a file folder called Ramblings. Ramblings are all of the things that I've ever put together that never became programs we actually sold. So
Those are probably the ones that are worth the gold right there.
it's 1.8 terabytes of information.
Wow.
That's how big that folder is, 1.8 terabytes. So, yeah.
Wow. Probably need to revisit that folder. Think about ancient
every
wisdom.
time. The problem is that every time I go into that folder, the journey down the rabbit hole begins, because I don't remember writing the vast majority of it, but I know I did. So, and then I go like, oh my gosh, I put together a workbook on this. Oh, look at this list of exercises. Oh my gosh, here's an activity list to do a change grid on the subject. It's like, how did I forget that all this stuff was done? But bottom line, it had no monetary or monetizable market opportunity in corporate settings. So it got set aside. That's where it sits.
interesting. Well,
But
thank
I'm glad
you.
you guys find it interesting. Nobody dropped off the call. That's always a good sign. I will encourage you guys to join us for the Circle of Brilliance calls, though, because that's where we're going to get into this in depth. It is a lot of material. I thought I'd give you guys the article so you can kind of see the foundation in all of it, but that's a 28-page article. That's a big ask for people to read that before we are really having our discussions. But yeah, anyway, we'll see how it all unfolds. And someday it would be nice to get back to the actual curriculum for the Oracle itself so that I could show you guys. Well, what I started to show you, what, 3 weeks ago? But I pay attention to where attention is. If you're finding this interesting, this is where we remain.
Fascinating.
Okay, final thoughts, comments?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Kay.
All righty. Okay, we'll talk again very soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
Terry.
All right,
Cheers.
bye.
Okay, all right, bye-bye.
Bye.